I retired to the deep woods of Oregon to die in peace, or at least to live in silence until I did. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer, building underground bunkers and high-security facilities for clients who did not want to be found. When I turned 70, I decided I did not want to be found either. I bought 20 acres of dense pine forest, disconnected from the grid, and built a cabin that was more machine than house. It ran on solar, drank from a deep well, and locked down tighter than a bank vault. I thought I had accounted for every threat. I had reinforced the walls against bears. I had installed fire suppression systems for lightning strikes. I had triple-paned glass for the winters. But I made one calculation error. I did not reinforce my perimeter against family. The invasion did not begin with a knock on the door. It began with the sound of diesel. It was a Tuesday morning. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. I was on the front porch nursing a black coffee and sanding a piece of oak for a new rocking chair. The silence was absolute. That was the currency I had spent my life savings to buy. Silence. Then a low rumble vibrated through the floorboards. It grew louder, a mechanical grinding that tore through the trees. I stood up, setting my coffee down. My driveway is a narrow gravel track barely wide enough for my pickup truck. It winds through the timber for a mile before hitting the main road. No one comes down here unless they are lost or invited, and I never invite anyone. A massive U-Haul moving truck burst through the tree line. It was too wide for the path. I watched in horror as the side of the truck scraped against the bark of a 100-year-old Douglas fir. The driver did not slow down. He gunned the engine, black smoke spewing into my pristine air. The truck swerved its rear tires, crushing the bed of wild azaleas I had spent 3 months cultivating. Then came the sound that made my teeth ache. The crunch of wood. The truck's bumper hooked the corner of my cedar split-rail fence. The fence I had cut, split and hammered by hand. With a sickening crack, the post snapped and 10 feet of fencing collapsed into the mud. The truck hissed to a halt 10 yards from my porch. The engine died, but the ringing in my ears did not. I did not put down the sandpaper. I picked up the pneumatic nail gun I had been using to fix the loose decking. I connected the air hose. It made a sharp click. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was wearing loafers in the mud. Loafers. Designer jeans that were too tight, and a button-down shirt that cost more than my well pump. Braden, my son-in-law. Or as I preferred to call him in my head, the parasite. He looked at the crushed fence, then at the mud on his shoes and grimaced. He did not look at me. He turned back to the truck and waved his hand like a traffic cop. "Okay, boys, unload it here," he shouted. "Be careful with the Italian leather sofa. If you scratch it, you bought it." 2 tired-looking movers climbed out of the cab. They looked at me, then at the nail gun in my hand, and hesitated. Braden finally turned to face me. He flashed a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. It was the smile of a man who sold timeshares to people with dementia. "Hey, Pop," he said. Surprised, I leveled the nail gun at the space between his feet. "Get off my land, Braden." He laughed. A short, dismissive bark. "Come on, don't be dramatic. We tried to call, but your cell service out here is garbage." "Seriously, Hank, how do you live like this? It is like the Stone Age." The passenger door of the truck opened. A woman stepped out, struggling with the height of the step. She was wearing a floral dress, suitable for a garden party, not a forest. Linda, Braden's mother. Following her was Jerry, his father, a man who always looked like he was melting. He was sweating profusely, holding a handkerchief to his forehead. "Oh my God!" Linda screeched. Her voice cut through the air like a buzzsaw. "Jerry, look at this. There is mud everywhere. Braden, you said it was a country estate. This is a shack in a swamp." "It is rustic, Mom," Braden said, winking at her. "That is the charm. We can pave the driveway later." Pave the driveway. My blood pressure spiked. I took a step off the porch. The air hose hissed as it dragged behind me. I said, "Get out," I growled. "I did not invite you. I do not want you. Turn that truck around, fix my fence, and go back to the city." Jerry looked at me, squinting as if I were a servant who had spoken out of turn. He wiped his neck. "Hank, be reasonable," Jerry wheezed. It was a long drive. "My sciatica is acting up. We need to sit down." "Do you have air conditioning?" "It feels humid." "I do not have air conditioning because I designed the house to breathe," I said, my voice rising. "And you are not sitting down. You are leaving." Braden walked up the steps, bypassing me. He put a hand on my shoulder. I shrugged it off violently. "Relax, old man," Braden said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound authoritative. "We are not visiting. We are moving in." I stared at him. The sheer audacity took the air out of my lungs for a second. "Excuse me, my parents had a little bad luck with the market," Braden said, waving his hand vaguely. "They lost the townhouse. Just a temporary setback. I told them they could stay with us, but our apartment in the city is too small for 4 people. Plus the lease is up. So I had a brilliant idea. We consolidate. We come here. Plenty of fresh air for them, plenty of space for everyone. We are doing you a favor, really. You are isolated out here. If you had a heart attack, no one would know for weeks. Now you have family." He signaled to the movers again. "The sofa, living room, big wall." I stepped in front of the door. I raised the nail gun. This time I pointed it at the doorframe inches from Braden's head. "One step closer and I nail this door shut," I said. "This is private property. I am the sole owner. You are trespassing." Braden sighed. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a key, a silver key with a blue plastic cap. My heart stopped. That was the emergency spare key. I had given it to my daughter Megan 3 years ago. I told her, "Use this only if I am dying or dead." "Megan gave it to me," Braden said, tossing the key in the air and catching it. "We are family. Hank, what is yours is ours. Legal or not, you are not going to shoot your son-in-law in front of witnesses." He jammed the key into the lock. I stood there frozen. Not by fear, but by the realization of betrayal. Megan gave him the key. "My Megan." Braden pushed the door open. The cool air from inside rushed out. "Welcome home, Mom." "Dad," he shouted. Linda and Jerry shuffled up the stairs, pushing past me. Linda wrinkled her nose as she got close. "Do you smell onions?" she asked Jerry. "I think he cooks with onions. You know I am allergic to the smell of onions. We will have to fumigate the kitchen before I can cook anything." "I do not cook." "Linda." Jerry grunted. "We will order out." "There is no delivery here," Dad, Braden said, following them inside. I stood on the porch, the nail gun heavy in my hand. The movers were lifting a gaudy white leather sectional sofa off the truck. It looked ridiculous against the backdrop of pine trees. "Where is she?" I asked. Braden stopped in the doorway. He didn't turn around. "Who, Megan?" "She is in the car behind the truck," he said. "She is a little emotional. Hormones, you know." He slammed the door. "My door." I dropped the nail gun. I walked past the truck, past the crushed fence, to the black SUV parked on the gravel road. The engine was running. The windows were tinted, but I could see the silhouette inside. I opened the driver's door. Megan was sitting there, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. She was crying. Not the soft, silent crying of a strong woman, but the heaving, gasping sobs of someone who has been broken. "Daddy," she whispered. I looked at her. She had lost weight. Her eyes were shadowed. She looked 10 years older than 32. "Why?" I asked. That was the only word I could find. "Why did you give him the key? Why are they here?" She took a shaky breath. "Braden." Braden made some bad investments, Dad. With his parents' money. And our money. We lost the house, we lost the savings. I closed my eyes. I had known Braden was a fool, but I didn't know he was a criminal fool. So you come here to sponge off me? I asked, my voice harsh. I raised you better than that. No, she sobbed. I didn't want to come. I wanted to rent a small studio. But Braden said, he said if I didn't support him, if I didn't help him fix this with his parents, he would leave. He said he would file for full custody of Leo. Leo. My grandson. 7 years old. He was at summer camp for another 2 weeks. He was the only thing in this world I loved more than my solitude. He said he would take Leo to Florida, Megan, continued, tears streaming down her face. He said I have no job, no house, no money. The courts would give Leo to him. Dad, please. I cannot lose my son. I will do anything. Just let them stay, just until Braden gets back on his feet. Please. For Leo. She grabbed my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. I looked at the cabin. Through the big bay window, I could see Jerry standing in the middle of my living room. He was taking down the framed picture of my late wife, Sarah. He looked at it, shrugged, and placed it face down on the coffee table so he could put his feet up. Rage, cold and sharp, solidified in my gut. They were not just invading my home. They were erasing my life. But then I looked back at Megan. If I kicked them out, Braden would carry out his threat. He was vindictive enough to use a child as a weapon. I knew the law. Without a residence, Megan would be at a disadvantage. I squeezed her hand. Get out of the car, I said. She looked at me, hope fragile in her eyes. Really? You can stay, I said. But there are rules. She hugged me, burying her face in my flannel shirt. Thank you, Daddy, thank you. It is just for a few months. I promise. I pulled away. I did not believe her. Parasites do not leave until the host is dry. I walked back to the house. Megan followed me, wiping her eyes. Inside, the transformation had already begun. My leather armchair, the one molded to my back, had been pushed into a corner. The white sectional dominated the room. Jerry was clicking the remote of my television. This thing is ancient, Jerry complained without looking at me. It is not even 4K. And where is the cable box I need to watch the game? I do not have cable, I said. I have a satellite connection for news and weather. That is it. Jerry groaned. Great. Just great. Living like savages. Braden came out of the hallway. He had a suitcase in his hand. My suitcase. Hey, Hank, he said casually. I moved your stuff out of the master suite. The air left the room. Excuse me, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Well, Mom and Dad need the ground floor guest room because of Mom's knees, Braden explained, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. And Megan and I obviously need the master bedroom. We are a couple. We need privacy. Plus, that room has the best view. It will help Megan's depression. He pointed to the door that led to the basement. The downstairs workspace is finished right. It has a bathroom. It is perfect for you. You like tinkering down there anyway. It is like a man cave. You will love it. He was evicting me from my own bedroom, in my own house. I looked at Megan. She looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. She was too terrified of him to speak up. I looked at Linda. She was already in the kitchen opening my cupboards. Ew, she said. Do you have any gluten-free crackers? All I see is canned beans and beef jerky. We need to go shopping, Braden. I cannot eat this survivalist trash. I looked at the nail gun sitting on the porch. I could pick it up. I could end this right now. But then I thought of Leo. Fine, I said. Braden clapped his hands. Excellent. I knew you would be reasonable. Now be a sport and help the movers with the rest of the boxes. My back is killing me. He turned his back on me and walked into my bedroom, slamming the door. I picked up my suitcase. I walked to the heavy steel door that led to the basement. I opened it. The air down there smelled of sawdust, machine oil, and cold concrete. It was the smell of my work, my sanctuary. I walked down the stairs into the dark. They thought they had won. They thought I was just a defeated old man retreating to his hole. But they forgot what I did for a living. I was a structural engineer. I knew how to calculate load-bearing limits, and I knew exactly how much weight a structure could take before it collapsed. They had just overloaded the foundation. I sat on my workbench surrounded by my tools. I did not unpack. Instead, I reached under the desk and pulled out a set of blueprints. The blueprints of the house. I turned on the single lamp. The light cast long shadows against the concrete walls. Above me, I could hear the thud of heavy footsteps. I heard Linda's shrill laughter. I heard the sound of my vintage jazz records being tossed into a box to make room for their garbage. I took a red pen from my pocket. Let them get comfortable, I whispered to the empty room. Let them think they own the place. I circled the main water valve on the blueprint. Then I circled the electrical junction box. Then the septic system override. I was not trapped in the basement with them. They were trapped in the house with me. The first conflict had ended. I had lost the battle for the ground floor. But the war for the cabin had just begun, and I had the home field advantage. I heard the toilet flush upstairs. Enjoy it while it lasts, Jerry, I said. I opened my laptop. It was time to check the security protocols. I stayed in my bunker for 48 hours. My basement workshop was soundproofed against the outside world, designed to dampen the roar of a generator or the whine of a table saw. But it was not designed to block out the thumping bass of bad pop music vibrating through the floor joists directly above my head. I sat on my cot, staring at the exposed plumbing of the house I had built with my own hands. Every flush of the toilet upstairs was a reminder that my sanctuary had been breached. I was rationing my own food supply down there, protein bars and bottled water, because the thought of going upstairs and seeing them in my kitchen made my stomach turn. But eventually, the coffee ran out, and a man can only survive on rage and water for so long. I ascended the stairs on the third morning. I opened the heavy steel door and was immediately assaulted by a smell that did not belong in a cabin. It was a cloying chemical scent, artificial lavender. It smelled like a mall restroom. I walked into the kitchen and stopped. My cast-iron skillets, seasoned over decades of use, were gone from their hooks. In their place were bright neon plastic spatulas and a set of cheap non-stick pans that would flake poison into the food within a month. Linda was standing by the window wearing a pink velour tracksuit that clashed violently with the rustic timber walls. She was holding a can of industrial-strength bug spray. She was spraying it directly onto the window screen. "Stop!" I barked. She jumped, dropping the can. It clattered on the hardwood floor. She put a hand to her chest and glared at me. "Good Lord, Hank. You sneak up on people like a ghost. Do not do that." My heart cannot take it. "What are you doing?" I asked, walking over and picking up the can. The warning label on the back was covered in skulls and crossbones. "This stuff is toxic. It kills everything. Bees, butterflies, birds. You cannot spray this here." Linda rolled her eyes. "Well, something has to be done. We have been here 2 nights, and I have not slept a wink. The noise is unbearable." "The noise?" I asked. "It is the middle of the forest. The nearest highway is 20 miles away." "Exactly," she said. "It is the nature noise. The frogs, the crickets, those awful birds that start screaming at 4 in the morning, and the buzzing. I saw a spider the size of my hand on the porch yesterday. Jerry refuses to go outside to smoke because he is afraid of getting bitten by a tick. We need to sanitize this place, Hank." Sanitize, I repeated, feeling a vein in my forehead throb. You want to sanitize a forest? I want to be comfortable, she snapped. I told Braden to call an exterminator. We need a perimeter spray, something that kills everything within 50 yards of the house. And we need to drain that pond out back. It is a breeding ground for those noisy frogs. That pond is a natural wetland, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. It feeds the aquifer. You drain that, you kill the trees. You spray this poison, you poison the well water. My water. Your water. She waved her hand dismissively. We can buy bottled water. Stop being so dramatic. You act like this swamp is a cathedral. It is just dirty nature, Hank. It needs to be tamed. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was a woman who had never created anything in her life, only consumed. To her, the world was just a backdrop for her comfort, and if the backdrop had teeth or made noise, it had to be destroyed. Give me the can, I said. She snatched it back. No. If you will not deal with the infestation, I will. I was about to grab it from her when a loud crash came from the living room. It sounded like plastic shattering. Then came Jerry's voice. Oops. Well, it was old anyway. I left Linda and the poison in the kitchen. I walked into the living room and froze. My heart did not just sink, it plummeted. Jerry was standing by the fireplace. He was wearing shorts and a tank top, his pale, flabby arms hanging by his sides. Next to him was a large cardboard box. He was clearing off the long mahogany shelf that ran along the east wall. That shelf was reinforced. I had built it specifically to hold the weight of my vinyl collection. 300 records, original pressings of Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk. Albums I had collected since I was 18 years old. They were not just music. They were the soundtrack of my life with Sarah. We had danced to these records in this very room while the snow fell outside. Jerry was tossing them into the cardboard box like they were frisbees. I saw the sleeve of Kind of Blue bend as it hit the corner of the box. What are you doing? I shouted. I moved faster than I had in years. I crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Jerry's wrist just as he was about to throw a rare 1965 pressing of A Love Supreme. Let go of me, Jerry yelped, pulling his arm back. You are hurting me. I looked down into the box. The records were piled haphazardly. Some had slipped out of their sleeves. One was cracked down the middle. You are destroying them, I whispered. We are making space, Jerry said, rubbing his wrist. He looked indignant, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Look at this room, Hank. It is depressing. It is like a mausoleum. Books, old records, dust. We need to liven it up. We are going to have guests. We need entertainment. He pointed to a large black object sitting on the floor. It looked like a robot from a bad science fiction movie. It had flashing LED lights on the front and 2 massive plastic microphones attached to the side. A karaoke machine. You are throwing out $5,000 worth of jazz history for a karaoke machine, I asked. Who listens to jazz anymore? Jerry scoffed. It is elevator music. Linda and I like to sing. We have a duet routine. Islands in the Stream. We were famous for it at the country club before. Well before. Before you gambled away your membership, I finished for him. Jerry's face turned red. Watch your mouth. We are guests here. You are intruders, I said. I bent down to pick up the box of records. I had to save them. I had to get them downstairs to the safety of the bunker. Leave it, a voice said from the stairs. I looked up. Braden was coming down from the loft. My loft. He was wearing a silk robe. He looked like the king of a castle he hadn't built. I am taking my property, Braden, I said, lifting the heavy box. Put it down, Hank, Braden said calmly. He walked over and stood between me and the stairs to the basement. You are cluttering up the house. We agreed that the basement is your space, but the common areas are under our management now. We need that shelf for the speaker system. "This is my house," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "These are my things." "Are they?" Braden asked. He took a sip from a mug. "My mug." "Technically," Braden continued, "since you seem to be having trouble managing your affairs, we have to make decisions for you. Hoarding is a sign of decline, Hank. Holding on to old, useless things because of sentimental value. That is a symptom of what I asked, tightening my grip on the box. Of senility," Braden said. He said it casually with a fake tone of concern. "We have been watching you. You are aggressive. You are paranoid. You are obsessed with this bunker mentality. It is not healthy. We are doing this for your own good. We are decluttering your life. You should be thanking us." I looked at him. I looked at the smirk on his face. I looked at Jerry, who was now plugging in the karaoke machine, the lights flickering in an epileptic seizure of pink and green. I realized then what they were doing. They were not just being rude. This was a strategy. They wanted to provoke me. They wanted me to throw a punch. They wanted me to scream and break things. If I acted crazy, it would make their case for guardianship that much easier. They were baiting the bear. I looked at the record on top of the pile. It was Sarah's favorite. Ellington at Newport. If I fought them now physically, I would lose everything. I would lose the house, I would lose my freedom, and I would lose Megan. I took a deep breath. I set the box down. "Fine," I said. Braden's eyebrows shot up. He had expected a fight. He looked almost disappointed. "Fine," he repeated. "You want the shelf?" "Take the shelf," I said. "I will move the records to the barn. They will warp in the heat out there, but at least they won't have to listen to you sing." I picked up the box again, straining under the weight. Jerry laughed. "See? That was not so hard. You just have to learn to compromise, Hank. Marriage is about compromise. Or living together in this case." He tapped the microphone. It let out a high-pitched feedback squeal that made me wince. "Check 1, 2. Check. Oh yeah. This is going to be great. Linda. Come down here." The sound system is set up. I walked to the back door carrying the heavy box. My arms burned, but the fire in my chest was hotter. I walked out into the humid air of the forest. I walked past the spot where the azaleas used to be. I walked to the old tool shed I called a barn. I set the records down on a workbench. I gently slid the kind of blue record back into its sleeve. I ran my hand over the cardboard cover. I could hear the music starting from inside the house, a distorted digital backing track of a Kenny Rogers song. Then Jerry's voice off-key and loud booming through the open windows, frightening the birds into silence. They were turning my sanctuary into a cheap roadside bar. They were desecrating the silence. I stood there in the shed, my hands shaking. Not from the weight of the box, but from the effort of holding back the violence. They called me senile. They called me a hoarder. They thought I was weak because I walked away. But they did not understand engineering. You do not destroy a structure by hammering at the walls. You destroy it by finding the stress points. You wait for the load to exceed the capacity. I looked at the conduit pipe running along the wall of the shed. It carried the main power line from the solar array to the house. Braden wanted to be the man of the house. He wanted to be in charge. I patted the conduit. "You want power," I whispered. "I will give you power." I turned and walked back to the basement door. I had to endure the noise for a few more days. I had to let them think they had broken me. I had to let them get comfortable in their victory. Because the higher they climbed, the harder the fall would be. And I was the one controlling the gravity. I drove back from the hardware store with a sense of dread sitting heavy in my gut. I had only been gone for 2 hours. I had gone to buy heavy-duty padlocks for my tool shed, hoping to secure at least one part of my life from the locusts that had descended upon my home. As my truck climbed the gravel road winding through the density of the pines, I tried to calm myself. I told myself to be patient. I told myself that for Megan's sake I could endure the noise, the smell of cheap perfume, and the constant disrespect for a few more weeks. I was a man who understood foundations. I knew how to weather a storm. But as I rounded the final bend, the light hit me wrong. Usually at this time of day, my front porch is bathed in a dappled, broken shadow. The sunlight filters through a thick canopy of leaves, creating a cool, shifting mosaic on the wood. But today, the light was blinding. It was harsh. It was naked. I stopped the truck. I turned off the engine. I did not hear the wind. I did not hear the birds. I heard the high-pitched whine of a chainsaw idling. And I smelled it. The scent of fresh sap. It is a smell that usually means construction progress, but today it smelled like blood. I stepped out of the truck. My boots sank into the gravel. I looked towards the house and I felt my knees buckle. It was a physical blow, harder than any punch I had ever taken in a bar fight or on a construction site. The white oak was gone. It was not just a tree. It was the anchor of this property. It was over 100 years old. Its trunk was so wide that Megan could not wrap her arms around it when she was a teenager. Its branches stretched out like the arms of a guardian, shading the house, protecting the roof from the heavy snows of winter. Sarah and I had named that tree. We called it the General. When Sarah was sick, when the chemo made her too weak to walk, I would carry her out to the porch. We would sit there for hours, watching the squirrels chase each other up the rough bark. She told me once that as long as the General was standing, she felt safe. She said it was the heartbeat of the land. Now the General was lying on its side. Its massive limbs were twisted and broken, crashing into the azalea bushes. The leaves were still green, still alive, unaware that they had been severed from their source. I walked toward the house. I felt like I was walking underwater. My vision tunneled. Jerry was standing on the porch. He was holding a beer in one hand and pointing with the other. He was directing two men I did not recognize. They were covered in sawdust slicing through the main trunk of my tree. "Careful with that section," Jerry shouted over the noise of the saw. "That is good hardwood. Do not splinter it." I walked up the steps. I did not say a word. I could not. If I opened my mouth, I would have screamed until my throat bled. Jerry turned and saw me. He did not look guilty. He did not look ashamed. He looked proud. He wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled. "Hey, Hank, you are back early. Look at this. We are making progress." I looked at the stump. It was a raw, jagged wound in the earth. The rings of the tree were exposed, a century of history laid bare. I could see the scar from the lightning strike of '98. I could see the thick growth from the rainy spring of the year Sarah died. Why, I whispered. The word came out like a croak. Jerry took a sip of his beer. He gestured to the roof of the cabin. "The signal, Hank." The signal was terrible. I tried to watch the pregame show this morning, and the picture kept pixelating. I called the satellite company, and the guy said that monstrosity was blocking the line of sight to the southern sky. He pointed to a shiny gray satellite dish that had been bolted clumsily to the side of my cedar siding. "I told Braden we needed to fix it," Jerry continued. "Sunday is game day. I cannot miss the game." And honestly, Hank, that tree was a hazard. It was leaning. If a storm came, it could have crushed the house. I did you a favor. I made a command decision. A hazard. He called the guardian of my home a hazard. I walked over to the stump. I placed my hand on the wet, sticky wood. It was still cool. I could feel the vibration of the chainsaw cutting through its brother further down the yard. "My wife loved this tree," I said without looking at him. "Her ashes are scattered in the roots." Jerry snorted. He actually snorted. "Oh, come on, Hank. Do not get sentimental on me. It is wood. It is a renewable resource. Besides, you are looking at this the wrong way." He walked down the steps and stood next to me, kicking the sawdust with his expensive sneaker. I negotiated a great deal with these guys, Jerry said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. They are cutting it up and hauling away the brush for free. And the trunk. That is solid oak. I told them to mill it. We can sell the lumber. Do you know how much oak goes for these days? He slapped me on the back. I figure the wood is worth at least $2,000, he said. I will keep $1,500 as a consulting fee for managing the project, and I will give you $500. That should cover the cost of the beer I drank from your fridge. Fair is fair, right? The world stopped spinning. He had murdered my wife's memory to watch a football game, and now he was offering to pay me with the corpse of that memory while charging me a fee for the execution. I looked at the two men with the chainsaws. They were just workers. They did not know. They were just cutting wood. But Jerry knew. He knew this was my home. He just did not care. To him, the world was only valuable if it could be sold or if it entertained him. I looked at his soft, doughy face. I looked at the greed in his watery eyes. I wanted to pick up the chainsaw. I wanted to cut the supports of the porch and watch him tumble into the wreckage. But then I saw Braden coming out of the house. He was looking at his phone, barely glancing at the destruction. "Nice dad," Braden called out. "Much brighter in here now. The Wi-Fi signal might even reach the patio." They were a team of locusts. If I killed one, the others would just swarm. I needed to kill the hive. I took my hand off the stump. I wiped the sap onto my jeans. "You are right, Jerry," I said. My voice was steady, terrifyingly steady. It was the voice I used when I told a client that their bunker needed 3 feet of concrete, not 2, if they wanted to survive the blast. "I am right?" Jerry asked, looking surprised. "Yes," I said. "It is much brighter now. I can see everything clearly." "Good man," Jerry grinned. "I knew you were not totally senile. We will get that money to you next week. Now be a pal and help them load the branches. My back is acting up again." He turned and waddled back up the stairs to check his satellite signal. I stood alone by the stump. The sun beat down on my neck, hot and unforgiving. I looked at the house, my cabin. It looked naked without the tree. It looked vulnerable, but it was not vulnerable. It was a machine I had built. Jerry had cut down the tree to get a signal. He wanted to be connected to the outside world. He wanted to bring the noise in. Okay, I thought. You want a signal? I will give you a signal. I walked past the workers. I walked past my truck. I walked into the barn and locked the door behind me. I did not cry for the tree. I did not cry for Sarah. I was done crying. I went to the electrical panel in the barn that controlled the external feeds. I looked at the breaker labeled Satellite Booster. I did not flip it. Not yet. Instead, I reached into my tool chest and pulled out a small black device. A signal jammer. Illegal in 3 states. Essential for the kind of work I used to do. "You want to watch the game, Jerry," I whispered. "You want to see the world while you destroy mine." I set the device on the workbench. I was going to let them watch their game. I was going to let them sell the wood. I was going to let them think they had won every single battle. Because when I finally pulled the trigger on my plan, I wanted them to be fat, happy, and completely unsuspecting. The tree was gone. The shade was gone. But the heat was just beginning to rise. The basement was not a prison. It was a command center disguised as a workshop. While Braden and his parents slept in the bedrooms I had built, believing they had banished the old troll to the dungeon, I sat in the glow of my monitors. They thought I was down here sulking, mourning my lost tree and my conquered living room. They did not know that the house itself was listening. When I designed the cabin, I wired every room with a hardline intercom system. It was old-school technology. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth, nothing that could be hacked from the outside. To the untrained eye, the units on the walls looked like beige plastic relics from the 1980s, dead and yellowed with age. Braden had laughed at the one in the kitchen the first day. He pushed the talk button, got no static, no hum, and declared it garbage. He didn't know that I had disabled the speakers but left the microphones wide open. It was 2 a.m. The silence of the forest was heavy outside, but inside my headphones, the house was alive. I cycled through the channels. Channel 1, the guest room. I could hear Jerry's sleep apnea, a rhythmic choking snore that sounded like a dying engine. Channel 2, the living room. Silence. Channel 3, the master bedroom. My bedroom. I hesitated before flipping the switch. I did not want to hear my daughter sleeping next to that man. But I was gathering intelligence. I was looking for structural weaknesses. I flipped the switch. There was no sleeping. There were voices, low, urgent, and clear as a bell. "You are sure he is asleep?" That was Jerry. He was not in the guest room. He was in the master suite. "He is down in the hole, Dad." I heard him lock the steel door. "He is probably crying over his old records." That was Braden. His voice dripped with that arrogant confidence that made my skin crawl. I leaned in, adjusting the gain on the receiver. The waveform on my screen spiked. I hit the record button. "So when do we see the money?" Jerry asked. The sound of liquid pouring into a glass followed. They were drinking my 20-year-old scotch. I could tell by the clink of the heavy crystal stopper. Braden laughed softly. "Patience. These things take precision. The bank called me today. The appraisal came in higher than we thought. The market value of this place is insane, Dad. The land alone, with the water rights and the timber. We are sitting on a gold mine. 1.5 million conservative estimate." I froze. 1.5 million. That was about right. But why was the bank calling Braden? The deed was in my name. The title was clean. I had no mortgage. "But he would never sign," Jerry said. "He is stubborn as a mule. You saw him with that tree. He treats this place like a shrine." "That is exactly why it is going to work," Braden said. "The tree incident. That was perfect. It goes right into the file." "What file?" "The competency file, Dad. I have been building it for 6 months, ever since I found out how much equity he had sitting here rotting in the woods." My blood ran cold. I sat perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the spinning reel of the digital recorder on my screen. "I have already spoken to Dr. Thorne." Braden continued. "He is a specialist in geriatric cognitive decline. I told him about the aggression, the nail gun incident, the hoarding of useless vinyl records, the obsession with security and the paranoia about the government, and now the emotional breakdown over a tree. It fits the profile perfectly. Dementia with paranoid delusions." "You are going to commit him?" Jerry asked. He did not sound horrified. He sounded impressed. "I am going to get power of attorney," Braden corrected. "Emergency guardianship. Once the court declares him incompetent to manage his own affairs, I become the trustee of his estate. I control the assets. I control the house. And I control the sale." "And Megan?" Jerry asked. "What about her?" "She loves the old coot." "Megan does what I tell her to do," Braden said dismissively. "She is weak, Dad. She is scared. I told her Hank is losing his mind. I told her he is a danger to himself and to Leo. She believes it. She is already looking at brochures for assisted living facilities in the city. Nice ones, expensive ones. We will put him there, visit him once a month, and everyone wins. He gets care, we get the capital." I felt a physical pain in my chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with my heart, and everything to do with the knife Braden had just twisted in my back. He was gaslighting my daughter. He was using her fear for her son to turn her against her own father. He was painting me as a madman to steal the life I had built. But what about the loan? Jerry pressed. You said we could get the cash this week. The buy-in for the crypto launch is Friday. If we miss it, we miss the surge. The Omega coin scheme. I knew it. Braden was not just evil. He was a gambler chasing a phantom jackpot. Don't worry, Braden said. I submitted the loan application yesterday morning. Cash out refinance. $300,000. Just enough to buy our position in the market before we sell the property next month. But the signature, Jerry whispered. There was a pause. I held my breath. I handled it, Braden said. His voice was smooth, proud. I spent 3 hours practicing on his old tax returns. A shaky hand, a little hesitation on the H. It is perfect. The notary is a buddy of mine from college. He stamped it without blinking. The funds wire into my account on Thursday. Gotcha. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I looked at the screen. The recording was capturing every syllable, every confession, admission of forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was a felony. Multiple felonies. I saved the file. Then I copied it to 3 different hard drives and uploaded it to my encrypted cloud server. I leaned back in my chair. The anger that had been consuming me, the hot reactive rage, began to cool. It hardened into something else, something cold and sharp like steel. Braden was not broke. He was greedy. He was willing to destroy my reputation, lock me away in a nursing home, and erase my existence just to fund a gambling addiction disguised as investing. And he was using my daughter as a pawn. I looked at the blueprint of the house again. Thursday. The money wires on Thursday. That was 2 days from now. If I went to the police now, I could stop it. I had the recording. But audio recordings can be challenged. They could say they were joking. They could say it was taken out of context. And even if Braden got arrested, the damage to Megan would be done. She would still believe I was senile. She would believe I set him up. No. I needed more than a recording. I needed them to walk into the trap themselves. I needed them to feel the consequences of their greed. I listened for a moment longer. This is going to be sweet, Jerry said, clinking his glass again. To the good life. To the good life, Braden echoed. I reached for my laptop. I pulled up the banking protocols for the house. Braden thought he was smart because he had a friend who was a notary. But he forgot who he was dealing with. I was an engineer who built systems for people who had enemies with satellites. He had applied for a loan against my property. That meant the bank would be running a title check. I opened a secure browser. I logged into the county clerk's database. Braden said he had submitted the paperwork yesterday. That meant it was sitting in a digital queue, waiting to be processed. I could flag it. I could stop it right now. But then I had a better idea. Let the loan go through. Let the money hit his account. Let him feel the weight of that $300,000. Let him transfer it to his crypto scam. Because once that money moved, the crime was complete. Wire fraud, money laundering. And while he was busy counting his digital coins, I would be busy changing the reality of the physical world around him. I closed the browser. I needed to make a phone call. Not to the police. To Caldwell. My old friend Caldwell was not just a lawyer. He was a shark who ate other sharks for breakfast. He had retired 3 years ago, but for this I knew he would come back. I looked at the time. It was almost 3 in the morning. I picked up the burner phone I kept in the safe. I dialed Caldwell's private number. He answered on the second ring. His voice was rough with sleep. Who is this? It's Hank, I said. Hank, it's 3 a.m. Is the cabin on fire? No, I said. But it's going to be. I need you to file a document for me. First thing in the morning. What document? I need you to sell my house, I said. There was a long silence on the other end. Sell it to who you love that place. I do, I said, watching the audio waveform of Braden's laughter on my screen. That is why I have to destroy it. I am selling it to the federal government. The Forestry Service always wanted this land for a fire watch station. Make the call. Hank Caldwell said, his tone shifting from sleepy to sharp. If you sell the land, you have to vacate. I know, I said. I will vacate. But not before I host a going-away party. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the wall of the workshop. I pulled down a large breaker handle marked auxiliary power. I did not flip it yet. Thursday. I had 48 hours to prepare. 48 hours to play the part of the senile, defeated old man. 48 hours to let them dig their own grave. I turned off the intercom speaker, but I left the recorder running. Sleep tight, Braden, I whispered. Enjoy the view from my bedroom, because the walls are about to close in. I sat in the dark of my basement for a long time after I intercepted the call. The glow of the monitors was the only light in the room, casting long, pale shadows against the concrete walls. I knew what I had to do. I knew the timing had to be perfect. But I still needed to go upstairs one last time. I needed to retrieve a few personal items before I initiated the lockdown protocol. I told myself I was going up there to pack. But deep down, I think a part of me wanted to give them one last chance to show a shred of humanity. One last chance to prove they were not complete monsters. I was wrong. It was late afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting an orange hue through the windows. The house was loud. It was always loud now. The karaoke machine was thumping a bass line that rattled the floorboards. I could hear laughter, drunken, slurping laughter. They were celebrating early. They thought the loan was approved. They thought the house was theirs. I walked up the stairs. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me. The living room was a disaster zone. Pizza boxes were stacked on my handmade coffee table. Empty beer bottles littered the floor like spent shell casings. Braden was sitting on the white leather sofa, his feet propped up on the armrest, typing furiously on his phone. Checking his crypto wallet, no doubt. Jerry and Linda were by the fireplace. They had opened a bottle of my vintage Cabernet. Red wine. Linda was swaying to the music, glass in hand. Jerry was trying to refill his glass, but his hands were shaking from the alcohol. I stood in the hallway watching. They did not see me. I was a ghost in my own home. Then it happened. Jerry lost his grip. The heavy bottle slipped from his sweaty fingers. It hit the edge of the mantelpiece and shattered. Dark red wine exploded everywhere. It sprayed across the stone hearth. It splashed onto the white rug, and it pooled on the wooden surface of the mantel. "Oh, damn it!" Jerry shouted. "Linda, get a towel. It is going to stain." Linda looked around dazed. "I do not see a towel, hurry. Use something, anything." Jerry panicked. He looked around wildly. His eyes landed on the only fabric within reach. On the mantel, centered and respectful, sat a triangular wooden case with a glass front. Inside was an American flag. It was folded 13 times, tight and precise. It was not just a flag. It was the flag that had draped the coffin of my squad Nam, a man who had dragged me out of a collapsed tunnel when I was 20 years old. A man whose name I whispered every year on Memorial Day. "No," I whispered. My voice was trapped in my throat. Jerry did not hesitate. He grabbed the case. He fumbled with the latch on the back. He ripped the back panel off and pulled out the folded triangle of stars and stripes. "Jerry, no," I said louder this time, stepping into the room. He did not hear me over the music. He shook the flag open. The crisp, clean fabric unfurled, and then he threw it onto the puddle of wine. He bunched it up in his fists. He scrubbed the stone. He scrubbed the wood. The white stripes turned a deep blood red. The blue field of stars soaked up the alcohol. "It is soaking it up," Jerry yelled, laughing with relief. "I got it. No harm done?" I stopped walking. I stood in the middle of the room. The air conditioning was running, but suddenly everything felt very hot, and then instantly absolutely zero. The rage that had been burning inside me for days simply vanished. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp it cut. I looked at Jerry scrubbing my friend's memory into a puddle of spilled booze. I looked at Braden, who glanced up, saw what his father was doing, and just shrugged before going back to his phone. They were not family. They were not even enemies. They were a structural failure. And when a structure is compromised beyond repair, you do not patch it. You condemn it. And then you demolish it. I walked over to the stereo system. I pulled the plug from the wall. The music died. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. Jerry stopped scrubbing. He looked up, holding the sodden, stained flag in his hand like a dirty dishcloth. "Oh. Hey, Hank," Jerry slurred. "Had a little accident. Do not worry, I will put this cloth in the wash. It will be good as new." He tossed the flag onto the floor. It landed with a wet thwap. I looked at the flag. Then I looked at Jerry. I did not yell. I did not raise my fist. I did not threaten him with the nail gun. I walked over and picked up the flag. I folded it, ignoring the wine dripping onto my hands. I held it against my chest. "You win," I said. The room went still. Braden lowered his phone. Linda stopped swaying. "What did you say?" Braden asked. He stood up, sensing a shift. "I said you win," I repeated. My voice was flat, monotone. It was the voice of a machine. "I am too old for this. I cannot fight you anymore. I cannot fight the noise. I cannot fight the mess. And I certainly cannot fight people who have no concept of honor." Braden's eyes widened. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Are you serious?" he asked. "You are giving up. I am moving out," I said. I looked around the room, letting my eyes linger on every piece of destruction they had wrought. "This is not my home anymore. You turned it into something else. It is yours. You want the house, take it. You want the land, take it." Jerry let out a whoop. He high-fived Linda. "I knew it," Jerry shouted. "I knew he would crack. I told you, Braden." "It is survival of the fittest." Braden walked over to me. He tried to look solemn, but the greed was leaking out of his pores. "You are making the right decision, Hank," he said. "We will take good care of the place. And do not worry, we will find you a nice facility. Somewhere with structure." "I do not need your help," I said. "I have my truck. I have my savings. I am leaving tonight." "Tonight?" Linda asked, eyeing the master bedroom door. "Well, that is convenient. We can finally move our things out of that guest room." I walked past them. I went to the guest room where my few remaining bags were packed. I grabbed my duffel bag. I slung it over my shoulder. I walked back into the living room. They were already celebrating. Braden was opening another bottle of wine. Jerry had plugged the stereo back in. I stopped at the front door. "One last thing," I said. They looked at me. "Since you are the owners now, I assume you can handle the maintenance," I asked. Braden laughed. "Maintenance, Hank, I am in real estate. I know how to run a house. Just go." I nodded. "Good luck," I said. I opened the door and walked out. The evening air wafted my face. It was cool and clean. I walked down the steps past the stump of the oak tree. I walked to my truck. I opened the passenger door and placed the wine-soaked flag on the seat. "I will clean you up, old friend," I whispered. "I promise." I walked around to the driver's side. I looked back at the house. Through the big bay window, I could see them. They were dancing. Jerry was spinning Linda around. Braden was raising a toast to the ceiling. They looked so happy. They looked like kings of the world. They had no idea that the man they had just kicked out was the only thing standing between them and the unforgiving reality of this wilderness. I climbed into the truck. I started the engine. I did not drive down the driveway. Not yet. I drove the truck around the back of the property into the dense cover of the pines near the old logging road that led to the town. I parked it where it could not be seen from the house. I turned off the engine. I sat there in the silence. I checked my watch. It was 6 p.m. The sun was setting. The temperature was dropping. I pulled out my tablet. The screen illuminated the cab of the truck. I saw the status of the house. Main power online. Water pump online. Security lock disengaged. Interior temp 72 degrees. I looked at the house one last time on the security camera feed. They were laughing. Braden was pointing at the walls, probably talking about which ones he would knock down. I tapped the screen. I opened the command console. I selected the file named Protocol 0. I hovered my finger over the Execute button. They wanted the house. They wanted to be alone in the woods. They wanted to be the masters of their domain. "Well, Braden," I said softly. "Class is in session." I pressed the button. On the screen, the status lights flickered. Main power disconnected. Backup generator disabled. Water pump locked. Security shutters engaging. Smart locks sealed. I watched the video feed. In the living room, the lights died. The music cut out instantly. The laughter stopped. I saw the glow of their cell phones pop up in the darkness like fireflies in a jar that had just been screwed shut. I reclined my seat. I had a thermos of hot coffee and a warm sleeping bag. I was going to sleep like a baby tonight. But for them, the nightmare had just begun. I drove into town with the windows down, letting the cold evening wind scrub the smell of stale wine and cheap perfume off my skin. The truck rumbled beneath me, a steady mechanical heartbeat that I understood. It was reliable. It did what I told it to do. Unlike the people I had just left behind in my living room. I pulled into the parking lot of the Rusty Spoon. It was a diner on the edge of the county line, the kind of place where the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and the clientele knew better than to ask questions. It was neutral ground. I saw Caldwell's car parked in the back. A vintage Lincoln Town Car, black pristine. It was like Caldwell himself. Old school, heavy, and dangerous if you got in its way. Caldwell and I went back 40 years. We had met when I was a young engineer dealing with zoning permits, and he was a hungry public defender. Now he was the most feared estate attorney in the state. He didn't practice law. He practiced warfare. I walked inside. The bell above the door jingled a cheerful sound that felt out of place with the grim purpose of my visit. I spotted Caldwell in a corner booth, his back to the wall. He was wearing a tweed jacket and reading a newspaper, but I knew he had clocked me the second I walked in. His eyes, sharp and gray behind wire-rimmed glasses, tracked my movement. I slid into the booth opposite him. I did not say hello. I just signaled the waitress for coffee. "You look like you went 12 rounds with a cement mixer," Hank Caldwell said, folding his paper. "I feel like it," I replied. He looked at my hands. They were stained purple from the wine on the flag. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask. He knew I would talk when I was ready. The waitress poured the coffee. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into my bones. "Is it done?" I asked. Caldwell reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a thick file folder and slid it across the greasy table. "The paperwork is ready," he said. "The transfer to the United States Forestry Service is drafted. The closing date is set retroactively for 2 weeks ago, as we discussed. Technically, as of the 1st of the month, you are a tenant at will on government property. The check for the sale is in escrow." "Good," I said. Caldwell leaned forward. He lowered his voice. "Hank, I need you to understand what you are doing here. I have executed some cold maneuvers in my time, but this is nuclear. He tapped the file. Once you sign this, that cabin is not a home anymore. It is a federal outpost. Anyone inside without authorization is not just a squatter. They are trespassing on a government installation. That is the point, I said. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a small silver USB drive. It felt heavier than it should have for a piece of plastic. It contained the audio recordings from the basement. It contained the video files of the tree being cut down. And it contained the keystroke logs I had captured when Braden accessed his bank account on my Wi-Fi network. I placed the drive on top of the file folder. Here is the rest of it, I said. Caldwell picked up the drive. He held it up to the light. What is on here, he asked. Evidence, I said. Proof of elder abuse. Proof of property destruction, but mostly proof of intent to commit wire fraud and mortgage fraud. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. My son-in-law Braden forged my signature on a loan application yesterday, I continued. He applied for a cash-out refinance on the cabin. He thinks the money is being wired to him tomorrow. Caldwell's eyes widened slightly. That was the only sign of shock he ever showed. He tried to mortgage a house you had already sold to the feds, Caldwell asked. He thinks I still own it, I said. He thinks he is stealing equity from a senile old man. He does not know he is trying to defraud a bank by using federal property as collateral. Caldwell let out a low whistle. He set the drive down on the table with reverence. Jesus, Hank, that is a felony. That is 20 years in federal prison. Minimum. I know, I said. I looked him in the eye. I want you to give that drive to the district attorney, but not yet. When Friday morning, I said, after the money hits his account, I want the transaction to clear. I want the paper trail to be absolute. I want there to be zero doubt that he took the money. Caldwell took off his glasses. He cleaned them slowly with a napkin. He was processing the strategy, looking for holes. You are baiting a trap, he said softly. You are letting him commit the crime so you can hang him with it. I am not making him do anything, I said. I am just not stopping him. I warned him, Caldwell. I told him to leave. I told him it was my house. He told me I was incompetent. He told me I was a guest. I leaned across the table. He cut down Sarah's oak tree, Caldwell. He used my squad leader's flag as a rag. He is not family. He is a pathogen. And I am sterilizing the wound. Caldwell put his glasses back on. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and respect. And the others, he asked. The parents, the wife, they are accomplices, I said. They are living in the house. They are benefiting from the fraud. But I am not worried about them going to prison. I just want them out. When the feds raid the place, they will be evicted. They have no money. They have no home. They will be on the street. What about Megan, Caldwell asked gently. That is your daughter, Hank. I looked out the window at the darkening parking lot. A semi-truck roared past on the highway. Megan is the reason I am doing this, I said. Braden has her convinced she is helpless. He threatens to take her son away. As long as he has money, as long as he has power, she will never leave him. She is terrified of him. I turned back to Caldwell. I have to break him, Caldwell. I have to strip him of everything. His money, his reputation, his freedom. When he is in handcuffs, when he is nothing but a number in the system, Megan will finally see him for what he is. She will be forced to stand on her own 2 feet. It is the only way to save her. It is a harsh lesson, Caldwell said. Life is harsh, I replied. Gravity is harsh. Caldwell picked up the file folder. He opened it to the signature page. He placed a heavy fountain pen on top of the document. You know, he said, looking at the document, most men your age just change their will. They do not orchestrate a federal sting operation. Most men my age just want to play golf, I said. I just want silence. I picked up the pen. The ink was black, permanent. I looked at the line where I had to sign. Transfer of deed. By signing this, I was officially homeless. I was giving up the sanctuary I had built with my own hands. I was giving up the place where I had thought I would die. But a house is just wood and stone. Honor is something else. I signed my name, Henry Mitchell. The letters were sharp and angular. I pushed the file back to Caldwell. "It is done," I said. Caldwell closed the folder. He put the USB drive in his breast pocket. "I will file the motion tomorrow morning," he said. "I will contact the U.S. Marshal's Office and the Forestry Service Enforcement Division. I will tell them we have a squatting situation involving high-value criminal activity. They will coordinate the raid." When I asked, "Friday morning," Caldwell said. "Dawn. They like to hit at dawn." I nodded. Friday morning. That gave me 36 hours. 36 hours to endure the noise. 36 hours to watch them gloat. 36 hours to say goodbye to my house. "Where will you go?" Caldwell asked. "I have the RV," I said. "I bought a Winnebago last month. Kept it in storage. It is fully stocked." "You planned this," Caldwell said. It was not a question. "I prepared for contingencies," I corrected. I hoped I wouldn't have to use it. But the load exceeded the structural integrity. I stood up. I threw a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. "Hank," Caldwell said. He reached out and touched my arm. "Be careful. When a rat gets cornered, it bites." I smiled. A cold, humorless smile. "They are not rats, Caldwell. They are termites. They do not bite. They just consume until the roof falls on their heads." And I just pulled the support beams. I walked out of the diner. The night air was colder now. I got back into my truck. I had to go back to the cabin. I had to go back into the belly of the beast. I had to play the defeated old man for one more day. I started the engine. Let them enjoy their victory lap, I thought, as I pulled onto the highway. Because the finish line is a cliff edge, and I just cut the brakes. I did not go back to the cabin immediately after leaving the diner. I could not. If I had walked through that front door and seen Braden drinking my wine, or heard Jerry laughing about the tree he had butchered, I would have done something that would have put me in prison instead of him. I needed distance. I needed the cold, impartial logic of machines. So I drove my truck to a clearing about 2 miles up the ridge. It was a spot I used to come to when I was surveying the land years ago. From here I could not see the house, but I knew exactly where it sat in the valley below. I parked the truck in the shadows of the Douglas firs and turned off the headlights. It was pitch black outside, the kind of darkness you only find in the deep woods. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out my iPad. The battery was fully charged. The screen glowed with a soft, artificial blue light that illuminated the cab of the truck. This device was the only tether I had left to the property. Braden thought he had taken everything from me. He thought that by changing the physical locks on the front door, or throwing my furniture into the yard, he had asserted dominance. But Braden was a man who lived on the surface. He did not understand what lay beneath. He did not understand that a house like mine was not just walls and a roof. It was a system. A complex, integrated network of circuits, sensors, and valves. And while he might hold the keys to the door, I held the codes to the brain. I launched the administration app. I had written the code for this interface myself. It was simple, utilitarian, and utterly secure. The login screen appeared. I typed in my username. Then I entered the 64-character password that I kept memorized. It was a string of random numbers and symbols that no brute force algorithm could crack in 100 years. I hit enter. A small spinning wheel appeared on the screen. Connecting via satellite uplink. Establishing secure tunnel. Accepted. The dashboard loaded. It was a digital twin of my home. I could see everything. I saw the current power consumption. I saw the water pressure levels. I saw the temperature in every single room. Living room 72 degrees, master bedroom 70 degrees, guest room 71 degrees. They were warm. They were comfortable. They were using my solar array to heat the floors I had laid with my own hands. I tapped on the security tab. The camera feeds populated the screen. I watched them for a moment. They were still celebrating. Braden was standing on the coffee table doing an air guitar solo. Linda was clapping. They looked so small on the screen, like ants inside a glass jar. I took a deep breath. It was time to close the lid. I navigated to the Access Control submenu. This was the gatekeeper. The system showed 3 active user profiles: Hank, Megan, and a guest profile I had created for the dog walker years ago. I saw the log of recent entries. Braden had not even bothered to change the digital codes on the keypads. He was using the physical keys he had stolen from Megan. He thought that was enough. He was so analog. I selected the master lock override function. Usually the electronic locks on the doors were passive. They allowed key access. But I had installed high-grade magnetic solenoids in the door frames. They were designed for a riot scenario. When engaged, they drove a 1-inch steel bolt into the frame that could not be retracted by a key. It could only be retracted by the software. I tapped the command. Engage maglocks. All zones. The screen processed the command. I imagined the sound echoing through the house down in the valley. A heavy mechanical thud as the steel bolts slammed home. Front door, back door, basement door, garage entry. On my screen, the icons for the doors turned from green to orange. Locked. Now they could not get out, and no one could get in. But trapping them was not enough. I needed to make them understand the reality of their situation. I needed to strip away the illusion of comfort they felt entitled to. I swiped to the environmental controls. The HVAC system. My cabin used a geothermal heat pump. It circulated fluid through pipes buried deep underground to harvest the Earth's heat. It was efficient and silent. It was what kept them cozy while the temperature outside dropped to 28 degrees. I looked at the temperature setting. 72. I tapped the override button. I did not just turn it off. I reversed the cycle. I set the system to purge. This function was designed for the summer to vent hot air rapidly. But tonight, it would act as a vacuum. It would pull the warm air out of the house and dump it into the night while pulling the freezing outside air in through the intake vents. I set the target temperature to 40 degrees. I hit execute. I watched the telemetry data. The fans kicked into high gear. The heat pump reversed flow. In about 20 minutes, they would start to feel a draft. In an hour, they would be reaching for sweaters. In 3 hours, they would be able to see their breath in the living room. I felt a pang of guilt thinking about the house itself. I was stressing the system. I was pushing the machinery hard. It was like herding a faithful dog to bite an intruder. But it was necessary. Then I moved to the water systems. This was the part that gave me no pleasure, but it was the most critical part of the siege. Civilization is built on plumbing. Take away the ability to flush a toilet, and human dignity evaporates very quickly. I accessed the pump house controls. My well pump was powerful. It pushed water up from 300 feet down. I selected the main supply valve. Close. The icon flashed. Valve closing. The water pressure in the house began to drop immediately. The next time someone turned on a tap, there would be a sputter, a trickle, and then nothing. No showers, no dishwashing, and no flushing. But I went a step further. I navigated to the septic system monitor. My septic tank had a safety valve, a backflow preventer. It was designed to stop sewage from coming back into the house if the tank flooded. I disabled it. Then I engaged the tank agitator. This was a maintenance device used to break up solids, but if used while the outflow was blocked, it would create pressure. Back pressure. I set the agitator to maximum cycle. The smell would not be immediate. It would creep up through the drains. It would start in the basement floor drains, then the kitchen sink, then the showers. By morning, the house would smell like a swamp. It would be uninhabitable. I sat back in the driver's seat. My finger hovered over the screen. I had set the parameters. I had lined up the dominoes. There was one final step, the master execution command. This was the protocol lockdown. Once I pressed this, the system would go into a hard loop. It would lock out all local controls. The thermostats on the walls would go dead. The light switches would stop working. The internet router would sever its connection to the ISP, cutting off their Wi-Fi, their streaming, and their communication with the outside world. The house would become a stone. A cold, dark, sealed stone in the middle of the forest. I looked at the time. It was 8 p.m. They were probably thinking about dinner. Maybe Braden was opening another bottle of wine. Maybe Jerry was looking for the remote control. I thought about the tree, the general. I thought about the sound of the chainsaw. I thought about the flag soaked in wine. I thought about Braden's voice on the recording planning to declare me insane. I am not insane, Braden, I said to the silent cab of the truck. I am just very, very thorough. I looked at the button on the screen. It was a large gray square labeled Execute Protocol. I did not hesitate. My hand did not shake. I pressed the glass. The screen froze for a second. The data stream paused. Then the interface changed. The blue background vanished. The comforting green icons of a healthy house disappeared. The entire screen turned a deep, pulsating red. A single word appeared in the center of the display, written in bold black letters. Lockdown. Below it, a timer began to count up. 0 hours, 0 minutes, 1 second. I watched the red glow reflect in the windshield of my truck. It looked like a warning light. It looked like danger. Down in the valley, unseen by me, but felt by the sensors, the relay switches tripped. The lights in the cabin died. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The Wi-Fi signal vanished. The silence I had craved for so long finally descended on the house. But for the people inside, it was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a tomb. I closed the cover of the iPad. I put it back in the glove compartment. I started the truck. I had a long drive ahead of me to the RV park where I would spend the next 2 nights. I shifted into gear. The trap is sprung, I whispered. I drove away, leaving the red light of the screen burning in my mind, a beacon of the justice that was coming with the dawn. I parked the RV in a designated camping spot about 5 miles away from the cabin. It was a clear night, the kind where the stars looked like shards of ice scattered across a black velvet cloth. The thermometer on the dashboard read 23 degrees Fahrenheit, which meant it was -5 Celsius. It was bone-chillingly cold, the kind of cold that snaps tree branches and freezes water pipes if they are not properly insulated. Inside the RV, I was warm. I had a propane heater, a cup of hot cocoa, and my tablet propped up on the small dining table. I was not watching television. I was watching reality. The security cameras in the cabin had switched to infrared mode when the power cut. On my screen, the interior of the house was rendered in ghostly shades of black, white, and green. It looked like footage from a submarine movie or a nature documentary about nocturnal pests. In a way, it was both. The transition had been abrupt. 1 minute, Braden was mid-toast, raising a glass of my best wine to his own genius. The next, the room plunged into absolute darkness. I saw the confusion first. In the green glow of the night vision, their eyes looked like hollow white circles. They froze. It was that primal instinct of prey animals when the environment suddenly shifts. What happened? I heard Linda's voice through the microphone. It was high, shrill, bordering on panic immediately. Braden, did you pay the electric bill? Relax, Mom, Braden said. He was fumbling for his phone. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, a blinding white flare on my screen. It is just a breaker. The old man probably has faulty wiring. I will go check the box in the basement. He walked toward the basement door. He grabbed the handle. He turned it. It did not move. I watched him rattle the handle. He put his shoulder into it. It is stuck, he grunted. It was not stuck. It was magnetically sealed with a force of 2,000 pounds. He could hit it with a sledgehammer, and it would not budge. Whatever Braden said, turning back to the living room. I will check the main panel in the garage. He walked to the door leading to the attached garage. Locked. He walked to the front door. Locked. He walked to the sliding glass door that led to the deck. Locked. I watched the realization dawn on him. He was not walking through a house anymore. He was walking through a cage. Hey, Jerry said. He was sitting on the sofa clutching a pillow. It is getting cold in here. Fast. I glanced at the telemetry data on the side of my screen. The HVAC system was running at maximum capacity, purging the interior heat. The inside temperature had already dropped from 72 to 55. It was plummeting. The heat pump was sucking the freezing night air into the vents, actively refrigerating the living space. I saw Linda wrap her arms around herself. Her velour tracksuit offered no protection against this kind of aggressive chill. Braden, do something, she shrieked. It is freezing, I am trying, Braden yelled back. His voice echoed in the dark room. He was holding his phone up, staring at the screen. No signal, he whispered. What Jerry asked. There is no signal, Braden shouted, his composure cracking. 0 bars. The Wi-Fi is gone. The LTE is gone. My phone is dead. He ran to the window. He pressed his face against the glass, trying to see outside. But outside was just infinite darkness. Hank Braden screamed at the window. Hank, I know you are out there. Turn the power back on. This is not funny. I took a sip of my cocoa. He was right. It was not funny. It was educational. Then nature called. I watched Jerry stand up. He was shivering violently now. The cold was seeping into his bones. I need to use the bathroom, Jerry mumbled. All that wine. He shuffled down the hallway to the powder room off the kitchen. I switched camera views to follow him. He went in. He did his business by the light of his phone. Then he pressed the flush lever. Usually a toilet flush is a sound of closure. A whoosh, a gurgle, and everything is gone. But not tonight. I had reversed the pressure in the septic system. I had engaged the agitator. Instead of a whoosh, there was a wet, heavy glug, then a bubbling sound, like a pot of thick stew boiling over. I watched Jerry back away from the toilet. He dropped his phone. Oh God, he yelled. Oh my God. Dark, thick sludge began to rise from the bowl. It spilled over the rim. It was not just water. It was the accumulated waste of the last 3 days churned up and pressurized by the pump I had hacked. It flowed onto the tile floor. Jerry scrambled backward, slipping on the mess. He fell hard. Braden, Linda, he screamed. The toilet. It is exploding. And then came the smell. I could not smell it from my RV, of course, but I knew what methane and raw sewage smelled like, and I knew that the ventilation system, which was currently sucking outside air in, would also circulate that heavy, rotten stench into every corner of the airtight house. I saw Braden and Linda run into the hallway. They stopped dead. They covered their noses. What is that smell? Linda gagged. She bent over and dry heaved. It is sewage, Jerry yelled, crawling out of the bathroom on his hands and knees. His pants were soaked in it. It is everywhere, Braden looked at his father. Then he looked at the ceiling vents. He is pumping it in, Braden whispered. The realization was horrific. The old man is pumping the septic tank into the house. He ran to the front door again. He did not just rattle the handle this time. He kicked it. He threw his entire body weight against the solid oak. "Open the door," he screamed. "Open the damn door!" He grabbed a heavy bronze statue from the entry table. It was a sculpture of an eagle I had bought in Arizona. He swung it with all his might at the glass panel next to the door. Bang! The glass did not shatter. It did not even crack. It was polycarbonate laminated ballistic glass. It was designed to stop a .44 Magnum round. A statue wielded by a desperate real estate agent was not going to make a scratch. The statue bounced back and hit Braden in the shin. He howled in pain and dropped to the floor, clutching his leg. "We are trapped," Linda sobbed. She had retreated to the corner of the living room, trying to get as far away from the bathroom smell as possible. But there was nowhere to go. The smell was the air now. "We are going to die in here. We are going to freeze to death in a sewer." I checked the temperature again. 45 degrees inside. Outside it was dropping to -6. The house was becoming a refrigerator filled with toxic gas. I watched Braden crawl over to the fireplace. "Make a fire," he yelled at his father. "Dad, make a fire." Jerry, shivering and smelling of waste, stumbled to the fireplace. He grabbed a handful of the decorative birch logs. He fumbled for a lighter. He managed to get a flame going. The paper caught. The wood started to smoke. But I had anticipated this too. A modern airtight cabin relies on a draft inducer fan to pull smoke up the chimney. Without electricity and with the HVAC system creating negative pressure inside the house to suck in cold air, the chimney became a fresh air intake. The smoke did not go up. It poured out into the room. Thick gray wood smoke billowed into the living room, mixing with the stench of the sewage. Coughing. Braden kicked the burning logs apart, stomping on them to put the fire out. "Stop, stop, you are suffocating us!" Braden screamed. They were huddled together now on the white leather sofa. The sofa that was their pride and joy. Now it was just a life raft in a sea of cold and stink. They wrapped themselves in the decorative throw blankets, thin, useless things made of synthetic silk. They were shivering so hard I could see the vibrations on the camera feed. I looked at their faces. The arrogance was gone. The greed was gone. The plan to declare me incompetent was gone. All that was left was the raw animal terror of three people who had spent their lives manipulating others, suddenly facing a force that could not be manipulated. They could not lie to the cold. They could not gaslight the darkness. They could not negotiate with a locked door. Braden pulled out his phone again. He held it up like a talisman. "Why is there no signal?" he cried. "Why?" "Because I installed a Faraday cage mesh in the walls, Braden," I answered silently. "Because I built this house to be invisible to the world when I wanted it to be." I watched them for another hour. They tried to break a window with a dining chair. The chair broke. They tried to pick the lock with a steak knife. The knife snapped. They tried screaming, but the insulation in those walls was 12 inches thick. A bear could roar in that living room, and a hiker 10 feet away wouldn't hear a thing. Finally, they gave up. They huddled in a pile on the rug, surrounded by the smell of their own failure. Braden was crying. I could see his shoulders heaving. He was not the master of the universe anymore. He was just a scared child who had broken into the wrong candy store. I checked the time. It was midnight. They had survived the first 4 hours. The temperature was stabilizing at 40 degrees inside. Cold enough to be miserable. Cold enough to risk hypothermia if they didn't keep moving. But not cold enough to kill them. Not yet. I was not a murderer. I was a disciplinarian. I tapped the screen and adjusted the HVAC. I turned off the active cooling. I let the fans idle. I did not want them to freeze to death. I just wanted them to have a very, very long night to think about their life choices. Tomorrow morning, the sun would rise. Tomorrow morning, the cavalry would arrive. But tonight belonged to the ghosts. I closed the tablet. I finished my cocoa. It was still warm. I lay back on the bed in the RV. I pulled the quilt up to my chin. I slept better than I had in years. The sun came up over the ridge at 6:30 in the morning. It was a pale, weak light that offered no warmth, only visibility. Inside the RV, I finished my second cup of coffee. I watched the steam rise from the mug and disappear into the dry air. I felt rested. I felt ready. I looked out the windshield. 2 vehicles had just pulled into the clearing next to me. The first was a county sheriff's cruiser, its light bar dull and heavy in the morning gray. The second was a black SUV with government plates and the seal of the United States Forest Service on the door. I put on my jacket. I stepped out into the crunch of the frosted grass. Sheriff Miller was leaning against his car. He was a big man, local-born, who had known me since I built the cabin. He knew I was not a man who made frivolous calls. Next to him stood Agent Perkins. He was younger, wearing a green uniform that was pressed sharp enough to cut skin. He held a clipboard in one gloved hand. "Morning, Hank," the sheriff said. His breath plumed in the air. "Is everyone inside?" "They are inside," I said, and the status agent Perkins asked. "Secure," I said. "Locked down since 2000 hours last night." Perkins nodded. He did not smile. He was not here for pleasantries. He was here because a federal asset had been compromised. "Let us get this over with," Perkins said. I climbed into my truck. The convoy moved out. We drove down the winding gravel road in a slow, deliberate procession. The sheriff first, then me, then the federal agent. We rounded the final bend. The cabin came into view. It looked lifeless. The windows were dark. There was no smoke rising from the chimney. The frost on the roof was thick, unbroken. It looked like a tomb sealed in ice. We parked in the driveway. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the ticking of cooling engines. I walked to the front door. The sheriff stood to my right, his hand resting casually near his holster. Agent Perkins stood to my left. I pulled out my phone. I opened the smart home app. The screen was still red. Locked. I tapped the screen. Disengage. The sound was loud in the quiet morning. A heavy metallic clunk echoed from inside the doorframe, then another from the back door, then the garage. The magnetic seals released. I reached out and turned the handle. It was cold, freezing to the touch. I pushed the door open. The smell hit us first. It rolled out of the house like a physical wave. It was thick, heavy, and wet. It smelled of raw sewage, stale smoke, and fear. Sheriff Miller coughed and covered his nose. "Good God, Hank." I stepped back. I did not want to go inside. For a moment, nothing happened. Then there was movement in the hallway. They came out slowly. They did not walk. They shuffled. Braden was first. He was wrapped in 3 throw blankets, his face gray and drawn. His lips were a shocking shade of blue. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and frantic. Behind him came Linda. Her pink velour tracksuit was stained with soot and brown filth. She was shivering so violently that her teeth were chattering audibly, a sound like dice rattling in a cup. Jerry brought up the rear. He was limping. He had wrapped a rug around his shoulders. He looked 20 years older than he had yesterday. They stumbled out onto the porch, squinting against the morning light. They gulped down the fresh, freezing air, as if they were drowning. When Braden saw me, something ignited in his eyes. It was not relief, it was hate. "You," he screamed. His voice was cracked and hoarse. "You tried to kill us." He lunged toward me, shedding one of the blankets. He looked like a madman. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, putting a hand on Braden's chest. "Back up, son." Braden slapped the sheriff's hand away. "Do not touch me," he yelled. "Arrest him! Arrest that old psycho! He locked us in, he turned off the heat, he pumped sewage into the house. It is attempted murder." He turned to me, his finger shaking inches from my face. I am going to sue you for everything you have. Hankji, I am going to take this property, your truck, your savings, everything. I am going to bury you under so many lawsuits, you will never see the sun again. You committed false imprisonment, kidnapping, torture. Linda was crying now, a high, thin wail. We almost died, she sobbed. We almost froze to death. Look at us. Jerry sat down heavily on the porch steps, shivering. My heart, he gasped. I think I am having a heart attack. I stood there calm. I looked at the sheriff. Then I looked at Agent Perkins. Agent Perkins stepped forward. He walked up the stairs with a crisp, authoritative rhythm. He did not look at the sewage stains. He did not look at the shivering people. He looked at Braden. Are you Braden Miller? Perkins asked. Braden blinked, confused by the uniform. Yes. Yes, I am, and I want to file a report right now against Henry Mitchell for… Agent Perkins held up a hand. Silence. The command was so sharp it cut Braden off mid-sentence. I am Special Agent Perkins with the United States Forest Service Law Enforcement Division, he said. Braden frowned. Forest Service. What does a park ranger want? I am talking about a criminal case here. Agent Perkins lifted his clipboard. This property located at Parcel 449, consisting of 20 acres and one residential structure, is the legal property of the United States government under the jurisdiction of the Department of Agriculture Forest Service Division. The silence that followed was heavier than the smell. Braden looked at Perkins. Then he looked at me. Then he looked back at Perkins. What Braden whispered. 2 weeks ago, Perkins continued reading from the document. Mr. Henry Mitchell finalized the sale of this land to the federal government to be used as a seismic and fire observation outpost. As of the 1st of this month, Mr. Mitchell has been residing here as a temporary tenant, pending the transfer of keys. Perkins lowered the clipboard. He looked at Braden with eyes like flint. That means, Mr. Miller, that since yesterday afternoon, you and your family have been trespassing on a restricted federal facility. You have damaged government property. You have altered government security systems. And you have defaced a federal structure with biological waste. Braden's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a fish on a dock. No, he stammered. That is a lie. That is impossible. He owns this house. He has the deed. He did own it, I said, speaking for the first time. Until I sold it. I tried to tell you, Braden. I tried to tell you to leave. But you were too busy measuring the drapes. Braden shook his head frantically. No. No, this is a trick. He is lying. I have the paperwork. I have the mortgage application, Perkins smiled. It was not a nice smile. Ah, yes, Perkins said. The mortgage application. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. It was a copy of the loan document Braden had submitted online. We received a flag from the banking system yesterday, Perkins said. Apparently someone tried to take out a $300,000 cash-out refinance loan on this property. Braden's face went from gray to white. I can explain, Braden stuttered. I was acting as his trustee. He is incompetent. I was going to manage the money for him. Perkins shook his head. You signed Henry Mitchell's name, Perkins said. That is forgery. You submitted it across state lines via the internet. That is wire fraud. But here is the part that makes this my problem, Mr. Miller. Perkins took a step closer to Braden. You tried to mortgage a building that belongs to the United States of America. You tried to use federal land as collateral for a private loan. That falls under Title 18 United States Code Section 1001. Fraud against the government. And since you intended to take the money for personal use, we are also adding attempted theft of government property. Braden looked at the sheriff. Sheriff, please. You know me. I am a businessman. This is a misunderstanding. The sheriff shook his head. I am out of this, Braden. This is federal. You are way out of my league. Perkins reached for his belt. The sound of handcuffs rattling was loud and clear. Braden Miller, you are under arrest, Perkins said. Braden tried to back away. No, you cannot do this. I have rights. Sheriff Miller stepped in from the side. He grabbed Braden's arm and spun him around. He slammed him against the porch railing. You have the right to remain silent, the sheriff said, snapping the cuffs on. And I suggest you use it, because you are digging a hole so deep you are going to hit China. Linda screamed. My son! Do not touch my son! She rushed forward, grabbing at the sheriff's arm. Agent Perkins stepped in front of her. Ma'am, step back, he ordered. Unless you want to join him in the back of the car for obstruction of justice. Linda froze. She looked at Braden cuffed and bent over the railing. She looked at the sewage on her shoes. She realized finally that her tantrums had no power here. Jerry was still sitting on the steps. He had put his head in his hands. He was rocking back and forth. We are homeless, Jerry whispered. We sold the condo. We have nowhere to go. I walked up the stairs. I stepped past Braden. I looked him in the eye. He looked back at me. There was fear there, yes, but there was also confusion. He still did not understand how he had lost. He still thought he was smarter than me. How Braden hissed. How did you know? I leaned in close. I did not know anything, Braden, I said softly. I just gave you enough rope. You did the hanging yourself. I walked into the house. The smell was awful. I pulled my shirt up over my nose. I walked through the ruined living room. I saw the stained rug. I saw the smashed statue. I saw the soot on the ceiling. I went to the kitchen. I grabbed the set of keys that hung by the door. The keys to my truck. The keys to the storage unit. And the keys to the ERO. I walked back out. Agent Perkins was leading Braden to the black SUV. Braden was crying now. Ugly, snotty tears. Hank, he yelled over his shoulder. Hank, tell them it was a mistake. Help me. I looked at him. I helped you, Braden, I said. I taught you a lesson about structural integrity. You cannot build a life on a foundation of lies. It always collapses. Perkins shoved Braden into the back seat and slammed the door. Linda and Jerry stood in the driveway looking lost. What about us? Linda asked, her voice trembling. Where do we go? Sheriff Miller looked at them with pity, but no sympathy. I can give you a ride to the bus station in town, the sheriff said. But you cannot stay here. This is a crime scene now. I walked past them to my truck. I did not offer them money. I did not offer them a coat. They had burned those bridges when they burned my wood and poisoned my air. I climbed into the driver's seat. I watched the black SUV pull away, carrying my son-in-law to a federal holding cell. I watched the sheriff loading Jerry and Linda into the back of his cruiser like vagrants. I started my engine. The house stood silent behind me. It was ruined. It would take months to clean. It would need new floors, new drywall, new pipes. But that was the government's problem now. I had my freedom. I put the truck in gear and drove away. I did not look back. I watched from the driver's seat of my truck as the final act of this tragedy played out. It was not a loud, explosive finale. It was cold and bureaucratic, exactly the way I had designed it. Braden was thrashing against the grip of the deputy, his face pressed against the glass of the patrol car. He was screaming something, but the heavy door muffled his voice into a meaningless drone. He looked small. Without his expensive suits, without his arrogance, and without the house he tried to steal, he was just a man in handcuffs, facing 20 years of federal time. Agent Perkins was not finished yet. He turned his attention to Jerry and Linda. They were standing by the sheriff's cruiser, looking like refugees from a disaster they had caused. They were shivering, clutching their dirty blankets, waiting for someone to save them. But there was no one left to save them. Perkins walked over to the stump of the oak tree. The raw wood shone in the morning light like a beacon. He ran his gloved hand over the cut surface. Then he walked back to Jerry. "You authorized this?" Perkins asked, pointing at the stump. Jerry swallowed hard. It was a hazard. I was just trying to help." Perkins pulled a citation book from his jacket. He clicked a pen. "That white oak was over 100 years old," Perkins said, his voice flat. "It was located on designated federal land. Under the Archaeological Resources Protection Act and federal timber statutes, the unauthorized removal of protected flora is a felony." He ripped the ticket off the pad and handed it to Jerry. Jerry's hands shook so hard he dropped it. "That is a citation for the destruction of government property," Perkins said. "The fine is $25,000, plus restitution costs for the environmental damage. You will receive a summons in the mail. Do not miss the court date, or we will issue a warrant for your arrest, too." Linda let out a gasp that sounded like a balloon losing air. $25,000? "We do not have $25. That is not my problem," Perkins said, turning his back on them. "Get in the car." I shifted my gaze to Megan. She was standing near the edge of the driveway, away from the chaos. She was wearing a heavy coat I had given her the night before. She had watched her husband be arrested. She had watched her in-laws be destroyed. I expected tears. I expected her to run to the police car, to bang on the glass, to beg me to stop this. That was the Megan I had known for the last 5 years, the woman who apologized for things she didn't do, the woman who made herself small to fit into Braden's world. But she did not move, and she did not cry. She looked at the police car. Braden was staring back at her, mouthing words. I could read his lips. He was not saying, "I love you." He was not saying, "I am sorry." He was saying, "Fix this. You stupid woman, fix this." I saw Megan's shoulders straighten. It was a subtle movement, but I saw it. She took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. She looked at the house that had been her prison for the last 3 days. Then she looked at the stump of the tree. And finally, she looked at me. Her eyes were clear. The fog of manipulation had lifted. She saw him now. She saw the cowardice. She saw the greed. She realized that the man she had been terrified of losing was actually an anchor she needed to cut loose. I opened my truck door and stepped out. I walked over to her. The gravel crunched under my boots. I stopped in front of her. I did not hug her. I did not want to treat her like a child. I treated her like a survivor. "Are you okay?" I asked. She looked at the police car one last time, then turned her back on it. "I am done," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was steady. "I am done being afraid, Dad." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. It was for $300,000, the majority of the proceeds from the sale of the land, to the government. I had kept just enough to buy my RV and fuel for the road. I held the envelope out to her. "This is for you," I said, "and for Leo." She looked at the envelope, then at me. "Dad, I cannot take this," she said. "This is your home. This is your retirement." "It is just paper," I said, pressing it into her hand. "My retirement is freedom, and you cannot be free if you are worried about rent. Take it. Go to a new city. Buy a small house. Send Leo to a good school. Get a good lawyer and divorce that man before he gets out on bail." She took the envelope. She gripped it tight. "Why did you do it this way?" she asked. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said brutally. "You had to see him in the dark. You had to smell the rot. You had to see what he becomes when the lights go out." She nodded slowly. She knew I was right. "Thank you," she whispered. I looked over at Agent Perkins. He gave me a sharp nod. The site was secure. My job was done. I walked back to my truck. I did not say goodbye. Goodbyes are for people who expect to see each other again soon. I was going away for a long time. I was going to find a place where the only noise was the wind and the only law was nature. I climbed into the cab. I looked at Megan in the rearview mirror. She was walking toward the sheriff's deputy who was waiting to drive her to town. She was walking with her head up. I started the engine. The diesel rumble felt good. It felt like a heartbeat. I had lost my house. I had lost my land. But I had saved my daughter. I shifted into drive. The tires bit into the gravel. As I rolled past the police car, Braden looked at me. His face was pressed against the wire mesh. He looked like a trapped rat. I didn't smile. I just tapped the brim of my hat. Lesson over, I thought. I drove down the mountain road, leaving the wreckage of my past behind me. The road ahead was empty and wide open. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in my head was perfect. I sat in the cab of my truck for a moment longer, listening to the silence settle back over the valley. The sirens had faded. The dust from the police cruiser had settled. It was just me and the cabin now. It stood there against the backdrop of the pines, a masterpiece of cedar and stone that I had poured 5 years of my life into building. I remembered laying the foundation with my own hands. I remembered Sarah planting the wild azaleas along the walkway. It was a beautiful structure. But as I looked at it now with its dark windows and the stain of the last 3 days seeping into its walls, I did not feel a sense of loss. I felt lighter. A house is just a container. It is just wood, glass, and copper wire. It only becomes a home when it is filled with peace. When you fill it with greed, with noise, and with people who view you as a resource to be mined, it stops being a home. It becomes a trap. I had built the trap. I had sprung the trap. And now I was walking away from the cage. I stepped out of the truck and walked over to the RV parked at the edge of the clearing. I called her the Fortress. She was a 40-foot diesel pusher, fully off-grid, capable. She had solar panels on the roof, a satellite uplink for my encrypted network, and a reinforced chassis that could handle the roughest fire roads in the country. It was smaller than the cabin, yes, but it had wheels, and wheels meant that if the parasites ever tried to find me again, I could just turn the key and vanish into the sunset. I climbed the metal steps. I stood in the doorway and looked back one last time at the stump of the oak tree. The raw wood was bleeding sap in the morning sunlight. It looked like a fresh wound. But I knew better. I had spent enough time in these woods to understand how nature works. The forest has a brutal kind of wisdom. It does not tolerate sickness. When a tree gets infected with rot, when the termites burrow deep into the core, you do not try to paint over it. You do not try to prop it up. You cut it down. You burn the infection out before it spreads to the healthy timber. I had cut down the rot in my family today. It was violent, it was loud, and it was ugly. But it was necessary. Braden was the disease. Megan was the sapling that was being choked out in his shadow. Now the shadow was gone. Now she had the light she needed to grow. I had done my job. The rest was up to her. I stepped inside and pulled the door shut. The latch clicked with a solid, reassuring sound that signaled the end of this chapter. I walked to the captain's chair and sat down. The leather was cool and firm. I turned the key. The massive diesel engine roared to life beneath me, a deep, steady thrum that vibrated through the steering wheel. It was the sound of capability, the sound of independence. I checked my mirrors. The road behind me was empty. The road ahead was a ribbon of gray asphalt stretching all the way to the horizon. I released the parking brake. I did not look at the rearview mirror. I did not look at the cabin. I looked forward. To Arizona. To Utah. To the Badlands. To anywhere the cell service was dead and the coffee was hot. I shifted into gear. The wheels turned. The gravel crunched one last time. And just like that, Henry Mitchell disappeared into the wild, leaving nothing behind but a lesson that none of them would ever forget. People often ask if I regret burning down the life I built in that valley. I tell them that a house is just an arrangement of wood and stone, but a home is a state of mind. The most expensive thing you can own is not real estate. It is your peace. I learned that you cannot fix a foundation that is built on the quicksand of greed. Sometimes the only way to save the structure of your family is to cut out the rot, even if it means tearing down the walls. I lost a roof over my head, but I gained back my dignity and my daughter's future. That is a trade I would make again in a heartbeat. Have you ever had to make a hard choice to cut a toxic person out of your life to save your own sanity? Let me know your story in the comments below. If you enjoyed seeing justice served ice cold, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of truth and retribution. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road and your doors locked.